Hello, I'm Scott Wipperman, the pastor here at First Presbyterian Church. And no matter who you are or where you are in your journey of faith, know that you're welcome here. We hope you enjoy today's service on this video, and we invite you to come join us for worship anytime that you would like, or join us in any of the other activities of the church. For more information about First Presbyterian Church, please visit our website at fpchelena.com or call us at 442-4775. God bless.
From Acts chapter 17. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by hands. And he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything, because he himself gives all men life and breath and everything else. From one man he made every nation of men, that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he determined the times set for them and the exact places where they should live. God did this so that men would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. Therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by man's design and skill. And may God bless our reading of the word today.
I'm pleased to be here. I'm always pleased to be back here. Such a joy to be with you. I know many of you from over the years, and I want to thank you before I forget it that you are a partner in the Bridges program. This church is, and many of you attend Bridges programs. And it's such a joy to come here and thank you for your support. And I hope that many of you have or will participate when our programs restart in September. Your bulletins and your newsletters keep you posted. We have a lot of exciting things going on, so I'm pleased to thank you for that. I'm also just glad to be back here. I love this church. I love this sanctuary. Does it get any better than the Swisher duo? I mean, it just doesn't, does it? No. It's such a treat when I go over to St. Paul's and hear Mike sing, and then I get to come over here and hear Ann play. To have them both here, we're done. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, whatever I've got to say is really just icing on the cake, or maybe not. But anyway, I'm so pleased to be here. I always tell people, if you haven't heard me before, that the first thing you have to get over is the accent. I've been in Montana for some 30 years, but no surgeon that I have found can correct the problem. So bear with me on that. I'm reminded as I stand here and take Scott's place, and he is well deserved. I went on the internet to see if he really was at the conference, and he really was. I saw him holding forth and leading meetings, and so I wasn't sure when he said, I'm going to be real tired, so maybe you can come. But he has a reason to be real tired, so we're glad to give him an opportunity to get some rest today. As a substitute preacher, I'm reminded of a story of another substitute preacher who stood before the congregation as I am this morning. And he said, you know, it's kind of like that piece of cardboard that's up there covering the broken window. It's just not the real thing. And so after the service, a lady felt a little bad that he felt bad about being a substitute. So as he stood at the door greeting people and listening to their comments, a lady approached him and she said, a preacher, that was a great sermon. You're not a substitute. You're a real pain. Okay, so hopefully that's not what's going to happen here. I want to talk to you about faith today, and I'm addressing the question, what is faith? And many of you are saying, well, I came all the way to church to hear that. If there's anything I do know something about, it's what faith is, and I probably don't need a sermon about it. We know that faith is the principal way that Christians characterize themselves. We say we're people of faith, and we say that we are participants in the Christian faith. So we use faith in ways that are very common. We know that it's the principal way we characterize ourselves. We also know what we mean when we say we're people of faith. What does that mean? Well, it means we're trusting people. We trust God. If we say faith, we have faith in an individual, that means we trust them. Faith is a word that we use for trust, and often it's directed to God, but also to one another. We also think of faith sometimes as obedience. It's obedience to what we understand to be the will of God. And I think that we may ask sometimes, what would Jesus do? It's another way of saying, if we just knew what Jesus would do, we would do that too, and we would obey him in that way. So faith often is talked about in terms of acts of obedience. We also think of faith as being beliefs or a set of beliefs. We have beliefs about God, and we call that our faith. And our traditional understandings of faith are captured in that old, wonderful hymn, Trust and Obey. There's no other way. Trusting, obedience, and belief. These are ways we think about faith, and we all know that. And these are all grounded in Scripture, and we know that. But today, I want to challenge you to think about another way of thinking about faith, and one that's also embedded in our Scriptures, and it's quite different, actually. So for a few minutes today, as I speak, I want you to set aside your preconceptions of the meaning of faith and examine with me an often overlooked yet profound view of faith set forth by Paul in Acts that you had read this morning. Let us examine these very, very interesting words. In him we move and live and have our being. In him we live and move and have our being. This is what is known among theologians as Paul's in God theology. He is saying that faith is living in God. What does that mean? That's what we're going to explore this morning. The concept of living in God can be very difficult to grasp because we tend to see God as a separate entity, it's separate from ourselves, and it's something that perhaps we can observe and experience, but it's not us, it's something different and separate. God is. We don't tend to think of ourselves as living in God. We think of ourselves as living near God. This is the Bible lesson for today. Paul is saying we live also in God, and that is his definition of faith. Here's an analogy. Those of us living in Helena, or the greater Helena area, live near East Helena. Now, what living near East Helena means is we know where it is. We know what it looks like. Maybe we know other people who live there. We may know there's a great Chinese restaurant over there. We may know how they're planning a new school there. We know about East Helena. But some of you may live in East Helena. And that means more than knowing about East Helena. It means you're part of the unfolding life of that community. What you do and say and contributes to the unfolding history of East Helena. You're an actor in the drama of East Helena, not just an observer. And just so Paul is telling us that's what faith is like. Faith is like living in God, not near God. We're part of the life of God, not just an observer of God. But this is hard to grasp. This is hard to understand. The late theologian Marcus Borg, who is, for my money, one of the greatest theologians that I'm familiar with, offers a graphic description of what it means to live in God. And this is what he says. He points to that magnificent picture on the ceiling of Sistine Chapel, where God is reaching down to Adam, who's a long way away, and Adam is reaching up to God and touching. And it's an iconic picture. And most of us have that picture emboldened in our brain when we think about the relationship between God and man. God is out there, man is here. We can observe God but we don't live in God. But Borg says there's another way of looking at what our relationship to God is. He contrasts this picture of a man's relationship to God with that of a goldfish in a bowl of water. It's just a beautiful analogy. The fish lives in the water. The fish moves in the water. The fish has its very being in the water. The water is the source of life in which the fish lives and finds life. For Borg, that's what it means to live in God. Now, to understand these words, we need to remember that Paul is addressing a population in Greece who is very highly educated, pretty wealthy, and they're schooled in theology. And the theology they're schooled in is sometimes referred to as pantheism. And just to make a long story short, pantheism means that God is very near. He's close to us in the natural processes of life. If we see those processes, we can experience God. He's present in those processes. He's near to us. And that's what pantheism is. And they believed, as a philosophy that grew up in the midst of pantheism, they had a philosophy called Stoicism. And Stoicism means if you understand the natural processes of life in the world, and you align your life with those, and you bear the results of that without complaining, then you are close to God. So whether it's life or death or rain or snow or tornadoes or hurricanes or earthquakes or whatever calamity we can imagine, those are the natural processes. And God is present in those processes. And what we do is align our lives to those, not complain, not fight them. And in so doing, we are close to God. And so Paul is speaking to these people. He grew up in that theology. He knew that theology. And he says, I want you to know there's a difference between pantheism and what I'm telling you about God. And so he turns pantheism on its head. And he gives them something else to think about. And that is the genesis of his words that we read today. One of the things he tried to say to them, that no, Christians don't live near God, we live in God. God is not simply the natural laws of the universe that we can observe, like night and day and rain and the beauty of sunsets and the wonderful mountains. All these things do not change. We can depend on these, but God is greater than what you see. God is the creator of what you see. All that is finds its source in God. And we might let Paul speak to us too, because how often we say or hear, maybe we don't say it, but we hear, I don't need to go to church. I just need to go out and sit on the mountainside and experience God. And you may not know it, but that's a form of pantheism. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's the way they felt also. Paul proclaims a biblical view of God, that God is not only the creator, he's ever creating and ever revealing. This is the unique understanding of the God in Scripture. And all that is finds God, or all that is finds its source in God. Another way of saying this is God is as we experience God, we are participating in the unfolding life of God because he's creator. And all that is from God. So as God creates, and as we participate in that, we are actually participating in the unfolding life of God. So Paul is saying to the pantheists this: you can observe God in the fixed natural processes if you want to, and you can find happiness in adapting your life to them. But I'm telling you that we do not live near an unchanging God. We live in an ever-creating God who created the natural processes. And this God continues to create through the lives of the people who live within him. So Paul is saying, you like to think that God is near in nature. We too believe God is near, but we believe that we live in God, and we cannot get away from God. This is a really big idea. To live in God means the story of our lives are actually part of the unfolding life of God. So another way of thinking about Paul's in God theology is this. God is viewed as the womb in which we know it's the environment. Let's put it this way. It's the womb or the environment in which the embryo lives and grows and has its being. God is viewed as that womb. In that womb, all that has ever occurred takes place. He's the womb in which all that occurs and ever will occur takes place. God is the womb in which all the people who have ever lived and all the people who ever will live are related. Every human, past, present, and future, are related in God because we all live in God, not near God. You know, we're told that many people were moved by Paul's preaching. And perhaps we can be moved also. You know, life for many of us is a series of routines. We raise and care for children. We work hard to make ends meet. We attend church and we volunteer. We retire and find ourselves busier than ever, not sure where the time goes. We learn to live on what we call fixed incomes. We often care for our aging parents or friends or spouses. We're busy doing those things we do, trying to reserve some time for others. But in the midst of all of this, if we're honest, in the dark moments of our lives, it is not common to ask, is this all there is? Is this what life intended to be? Is this what my life was intended to be? I feel so insignificant sometimes. There's nothing special about my life. We may reflect on the fact that there are in today's world 7 billion people who don't even know we exist. We travel some what we can afford, but we'll never see the majority of the world, even many parts of the world, even parts of the world we live in. We try to learn, but the more we try, the more we realize that what we're learning is just a drop in a bucket of what there is to learn. In the final analysis, we don't seem to know much about anything. How many times do I say, the more I learn, the more I realize how little I know? If we're honest. When we think about it, each of us is a simple person doing routine things. Sometimes we feel trapped by responsibility, hemmed in by our financial or physical circumstances. Did God really intend for us to live this way? To feel this way? Can our lives have any meaning between our first and last breaths? Today, I'm going to suggest to you that it's human to yearn for something more. And for us, Paul's words can be very good news about living in God. Living in God means there's no such thing as an insignificant life. Living in God means that we have the opportunity to be part of something much larger than ourselves. Our lives, yours and mine, are chapters in a book about the life of God. We're part of the history of God. To live in God means that we participate in the story in very unique ways by the lives we live, and the things we do, and the things we say, regardless of how mundane and routine they may seem to us. Our joys, our accomplishments, our acts of kindness, our tolerance and acceptance of the shortcomings of others, and our disappointments are all part of the story of creation that continues to unfold in the life of God. And living in God, we're chapters in that story. There's no such thing as an insignificant life. Our lives are chapters in the unfolding history of God. Living in God also means we're not alone. Since we and all people live in God, we are linked with the 4 babies that are born every second on this earth. We live in the womb that is God. Paul was trying to say to them, remember, we don't live near God, we live in God. And because of that, we are kin to all those babies that are born every minute on this earth. We are also linked with 108 billion people who have ever lived on this earth. We're related to them because we all live in God. Just as we might find a kinship with anyone and everyone who lives in Montana because we all live in the same state. So if all the Montanans were to go to Miami, what would we do? Get together because we're Montanans. So also we have a kinship with all the lives before us. And currently, because we all live in the womb of God. Whereas we might see ourselves as insignificant, Paul challenges us to see that we're participants with billions of people in the unfolding life of God. You see, Paul is introducing something we have never heard. They have never heard. We don't live near God. We live in God. Finally, and most importantly for me, to live in God means there's no way to live apart from God. To live in God means there's no way to live apart from God. Regardless, and I know there are people who are more focused on God's judgment than God's grace, but what living in God means is regardless of what we do, regardless of how we behave, regardless of how hateful or loving we are to one another, regardless of all of these things, we are God's offspring. And we cannot escape the boundless love of God. It can't be done. And I told you a minute ago, in the Garden of Eden, God threatened death to those who ate the forbidden fruit. But they lived. They multiplied. Wasn't exactly what they had in mind. God forgave them because they lived in God. There's no way to avoid that. Every one of us lives in God. There's no such thing as living out of God. Can't be done. The only difference among us is some may not realize that. God and man are stuck with one another. Paul said it best, "For I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels or demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen." That's what Paul said. That's in God theology. We're stuck with one another. And the one thing we never need to worry about, if you got everything else to worry about, is being forced to live out of God. With that behind us, we are free to take risk, to embrace each other, to lift up those who are downtrodden, and to confront the downtrodders. We're free to make mistakes. We're free to love. We're free to accept. We're free to tolerate. For Paul, this is the essence of faith, recognizing the intertwining of God's life and ours. We are chapters in the unfolding life of God. So a faithful person is more than one who trusts. It's more than one who believes. It's more than one who's obedient. Paul is saying whether we realize it or not, we live in God and we're part of the unfolding history of God. Could it be that the God for whom we search is the God in whom we live? I think so. What a joy it is to live in God. That joy is the essence of faith.